From here we have an excellent view of Lublin Castle, and around it were the streets of the old ghetto. But as you can see, there's absolutely nothing left now. The Nazis pulled the houses down. In fact, they were still standing, but then the communist authorities, when they replanned the city, finished off the work for them. The Nazis used slave labour from Majdanek to pull the houses down, and this was probably part of their urban regeneration, destruction of ancient houses to put up whatever they thought had to be put up in its place. They have a road there leading from the castle which goes into the Grodzka gate, and that doesn't actually show on any of the photographs that I've seen. It would have been somewhat different, but when the whole place was actually remodeled, it must have involved quite a lot of earth being moved around, because you can see how hilly it was in the streets which were below the castle, and now you've got the castle square, which is quite flat. On this square we have the ruins of the Church of St. Michael, which was built in the 13th century, and several hundred years later it had to be demolished, I think for structural reasons, and since that time this has been empty, although in recent years the foundations have been exposed so people can actually see where the church was. In 1942 the Nazis used this square as a place for gathering people to check their documentation. They were on the 16th of March 1942 the Nazis entered the Lublin ghetto from Ulica Szeroka and carried out the first deportation from there. On the 30th of March 1942 we can see from the minutes of the meeting of the Judenrat, which was held in this building which is beside me right now, that they replaced the former documentation which was from the police, which gave protection to people who were working and their entire families. They replaced this with what they called a Jew permit. I think that's a fair enough translation for Judenausweis. And the people who had this J-Ausweis, they could stay in the ghetto, but it did not protect their families. Many people were hiding in this part of the ghetto. They were all brought here, they all gathered here. Then those which had this permit had piled it up, and those that didn't were then segregated. Some of them were murdered here, others were murdered elsewhere. The ghetto boundary is in fact on the other side of the square, so those buildings in front were outside of the ghetto, whereas the buildings now which you can see in front of me were actually in the ghetto itself.